All right. So I'm recording now. Okay. All right. So any questions regarding assignments, anything regarding the course up until this point or moving forward?
I do have a question about like more of the project.
Okay, go ahead.
So there was one part of the project, I think, where like when you're writing it, it says like something about literature review. What is exactly literature review?
Okay. Did you ask me this already, Helena?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay, for some reason I have a memory of you asking the same question. So a literature review, when we're doing a project, if you remember, I think I broke it down when you saw the research projects. You have, I'm sorry, the research articles. You have your introduction, you have your literature review, you have your methods that you're describing, and then your results, and then your conclusions, right? Those are the main parts of what you're going to see in a research project. So your introduction is just, why is this important? Why does this matter to us? Why to the reader? You're appealing to their interest in what they're about to read. Your literary review is going, or your literature review is going to be a background on theoretical concepts. So a majority of all of your sources, like last week, I think I said you should have about 8 sources at this point that you're looking at. Some of you had a lot more than that, and that's great. All of that is really going to describe where you got your idea, kind of similar to what we're doing in Packback, right? So you ask a question, similar in research, you're asking a research question. Your description is where you got that research question. What was the paragraph or two that made you ask that question? That's your literary review, okay? So that's what you're describing how you got to the point where you are and asking that question. And then of course your source at the bottom is where you derive that. So that's all your literature review is. It's kind of the background theoretical concepts that led you to ask your research question. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Going once, going twice. All right. So today or this week, we're going to talk about cognition. Now, cognition, put simply, is just how we think. All right. Before this, we were talking about how we learn, how we remember things, how we perceive things. Right. This is taking all of those ways of ingesting information, and now we're going to focus a little bit more on how we manipulate that information and then produce a result or produce an action or a thought. Okay, and that's all cognition is taking all of these all of this information in either through learning or memorization or recalling from memory through our senses, and then spitting out a result in behaviors or actions. That's all we look at with cognition, and we call that the term we use that is thinking, right, or the mental activity for organizing. Oh, I'm sorry, I meant to be sharing my screen with you. Excuse me. I wish there was just like a single button I could use to, there we go. All right, so thinking. Sorry, is mental activity for organizing, understanding, and communicating. Excuse me. So these two, organizing, understanding, I do want to pay attention. Understanding. I want to pay particular attention to, because we can do these things. We can organize and understand. Like if I looked at somebody, can I tell how they're organizing and understanding something? Like right now, a lot of you have your screens off. Can I tell whether you're organizing and understanding the information that I'm giving you?
No.
Why not? because you're not communicating, right? So communication is vital to understanding cognition. So if we have somebody that either doesn't communicate in a way that other people can receive it or understand or evaluate it or observe it, then we can't understand what their cognitive abilities are, if that makes sense. Okay, and that plays a very important part, especially when we get into cognitive disorders, which we're not really. I think your book talks about it. Hopefully, we'll have time this week to get into that. I don't know if we will. But anyway, communication is vital to understanding cognition as we know it. Okay, so organizing, understanding, and communicating. So I'm going to ask you all, and I'm going to use this example some other time. I want you to think of let me see here. Think of a tree. Okay, picture a tree in your mind. Can you do that? Who wants to describe to me what a tree is?
I could do that for you if you want.
All right, go for it, Logan.
So a tree, pretty much like, I mean, it's just a tree, you know. It's got tree and leaves.
Okay,
It's
okay.
just
So
wood, and it's just a big compact piece of wood with some branches and leaves.
leaves, wood, branches. Okay, okay.
Maybe some acorns. I don't know.
Okay, all right. Getting a little more specific now, right? Branches
Absolutely.
and acorns. Okay. Who's got some other information about trees that I can put in this list?
Fruit.
Fruit. Okay. Anything else?
And it could also be like where an animal lives.
An animal lives. Wow. Okay. So that we really got a little bit more deep on that one. Okay.
You got different types of trees.
You got different types of trees. Okay. Different types. I'm just going to abbreviate different types. All right. So what I did is I gave you a concept. I gave you just a word. And based on that word, many of you started thinking different things. And very few of you probably thought of the exact same thing at the exact same time. Okay. So in that respect, cognition is very much different for everybody. We take things, you know, we talked about learning. Everybody learns differently. Everybody remembers differently. Everybody has different proportions of senses they use. Cognition is very similar to that in that we all develop different ideas at different times, okay? So what some of you did was come up with a concept of what trees are, or an idea that represents the category of the object, okay? For some, I think Logan, you talked about leaves, right? It has leaves, it has wood and all that. So that was a concept that you came up with. Others talked about, like, so you had formal concept, which was, I'm sorry, concepts, formal concept, which was a feature, specific features, similar to what Logan talked about, right? Then you have natural concepts. So natural concepts are kind of like, I think, did we talk about fuzzy logic when we talked about memory? Did we get into that in this class? What fuzzy memory is? Or fuzzy learning? I don't think we did. So what fuzzy logic is similar, no, I'm not going to go into computers. I love computers, but fuzzy logic is kind of a naturalistic way of looking at things. For example, we're born into this world knowing that light comes from above and that things fall to the ground, right? We all have a concept of some kind of physics in our mind. We may not have learned physics, but we know how things work. We know that certain if we throw a ball, it's not going to go forever because we've tried that. We've done things through experimentation. We may know people are angry by their face. We don't have to be psychologists to understand that people are upset with something or they are not pleased. We do that naturally. Okay, so that's called that we know that as fuzzy logic. So these are formed from real world experiences. Real world experiences. Okay, I like to experiences. So somebody brought up that animals live in it. It's home to many animals. All right. Maybe you learned that through biology course, but maybe you also learned that you see squirrels in there, you see birds nests in there, you know birds live there. So whether you're a biologist or not, you can see that there is wildlife that lives in trees. We know that is the natural concept, or fuzzy logic. All right. The third type is prototype. And what some of you did was you came up with something that closely matches. You got really specific and said there are different types. There might be a spruce, there might be hemlock, there might be maple. We have specific, we called to our memory a specific type that may or may not change over time. We started mixing different concepts into that to come up with a specific, an actual specific type of tree. Okay, so those are your three concepts that we look at when coming up with thoughts, and we do that naturally. Again, just going through the world, we develop these concepts. Okay, all right. So with those concepts, we develop, you know, and you kind of did this at a very basic level. Is I asked you to describe a tree. So many of you had to create a mental representation in your mind of what I was asking, and then you spit out an output, and you know, was still problem solving. But problem solving goes much deeper than that. We have different ways of problem solving, and we might have some of us have one or two ways that we do it, but for the most part, we all engage in different types of problem solving. Now, your book gave you a pretty extensive list of ways that we problem solve. I'm not going to go through every one of them, okay? But again, if we look at naturalistic ways of doing things, and this kind of goes back to the Bobo doll experiment, right? What do you think the child's reaction would have been to the Bobo doll if they had no experience whatsoever? They walked into a room and there's a room full of toys, and there's a Bobo doll there, and they had not seen anybody interact with that doll whatsoever. What do you think that child's reaction would have been to the Bobo doll?
He probably would have just walked past it and wouldn't have even touched it.
Absolutely. And that happened in that experiment. And we didn't go through the full video of that because I think it's about 15 minutes long. But yeah, they would have looked past it. They probably would have engaged in some other kind of play to occupy their mind, or have done nothing. So what they were doing is, again, latent learning through social means or through modeling or tutoring to see how other people react to that. One thing that we do naturally, because we're born as little scientists, we come into this world exploring the world around us and interacting with our environment in our own natural time. So technically, we don't necessarily even need anybody to learn from, which is crazy to think about, right? And there have been many cases where people have had minimal interactions with people, and they still exist in the world, and they still thrive. Maybe not as well adapted, but it does happen because we do that naturally. Our minds develop naturally like that. So one of the ways that we engage in problem solving is trial and error. Now, trial and error is trying one solution and based on success or failure, we do it again. And that could, as Megan brought up, we could look at that as operant conditioning, right? Are we rewarded? Did we get something accomplished by doing that? Or did we get nothing accomplished? Or even worse, did we receive some kind of adverse action? So trial and error, I always look at as kind of a form of operant conditioning because there is a consequence, okay? Now, sometimes we may not have any consequence. We may not have either punishment or, but if we're looking to gain success and we don't get success, we can consider that a failure. And we're going to try something else. That's the normal process for trial and error. Sometimes you get people, maybe you've fallen into, I've done this once or twice, where you try and do the same thing over and over and you get no different results, otherwise known as what? Insanity, right? I think I've heard that numerous times throughout my life. So trying the same thing over and over and not getting a different result. But we don't tend to do that. We like results. We like to succeed. So we change it up a little bit. All right. Another way that we engage that your book talked about is algorithms. Now, algorithms are specific steps for solving problems. Now, algorithms occur through learning over time. Maybe we develop our own algorithms. Maybe somebody taught us algorithms. So for example, who can describe to me how to tie a shoe?
Wait, can you repeat the question? I was a little confused.
Who can describe to me step by step how to tie a shoe?
You just pull up the laces, you cross one over the other, and then you have to just like grab the two, almost like make it kind of like people would say like bunny ears, or like, and then you kind of like tie them together and then pull.
Okay. So let me ask you something. How many of you would be able to tie a shoe had you not been taught how to do that? Like if you saw a shoe and you somehow figured out that it goes on your feet, but it's really loose, how many of you, without seeing an end example, would be able to tie a shoe successfully? Probably very few of you, if probably none of you, really. If you never knew what a tied shoe looked like, you don't have an example, and nobody showed you the steps to tying a shoe successfully, you may have come up with your own way of somehow making a knot of some sort, but tying a shoe would have been probably the last thing on your mind. So through that, we've either developed or acquired algorithms, and we can I don't mean to mislead you here. We can develop algorithms. We can develop our own algorithms based on trial and error. But for the most part, we get algorithms passed down to us from other people or caregivers. Okay, so does that make sense? So algorithms are just specific steps for solving a problem. Okay, oops, problem. All right, so the other way, the other problem solving that I want to highlight is heuristics. Actually, let me, so heuristics is a guess. And that's based on, we'll call it a guess based on education or experience. Education or experience, we'll say. And whenever you see me write EXP, I do this with my therapy notes all the time. So I usually like client experiences. So I'll do like EXP. It's just a lot shorter way of doing it. So forgive me, but EXP stands for experiences. So we base that on what we call rule of thumb. So things that we know have happened for us in the past, kind of like algorithms, but we're applying it to something else. So for example, if you were in a boat and you knew that you had to tie the boat up to the dock, you've never tied a boat up to the dock before, but you've tied your shoe. So based on what you've known in the past to work for other applications, you're going to use that to tie that boat to the dock. It may not be the most secure thing, especially doing the bunny ears, right? Anybody that's tied a boat knows that that's not the most secure way to tie a boat to the dock. To come up with some kind of solution that's going to be close. All right, so that would be an example of heuristic, just applying what you know based on past experiences. Okay. All right. So what are some problems that we have with problem solving and decision making? Oops, I didn't mean to do that.
We don't really think it through before we do it. We more just like, we just do something without learning first, or we're given directions, we might look over it and speed through it and not process the information and then do it. And then when it's done wrong, we probably think like, why did I do this wrong? Or like, I can't do this right. Like you'll get frustrated.
Okay. Okay. So like speeding through that and not thinking things through, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that really depends a lot. And I didn't get into that really into this lesson, but that really depends a lot on the risk and the outcome. So if we have something like for example, and I know it was nobody in this class, but how many of you would take a midterm or a final exam without having even looked at the material? Like your grade depends. If I said 100% of your grade depends on the midterm and the final, how many of you would take that midterm and final without looking, without even preparing for them? I'm hoping everybody in this room would say no, or everybody in the Zoom would say no, because we don't do things that way. The risk of having a catastrophic failure would be too big. So you might be right. Was that Elena, by the way?
Yeah.
I think it was. Yeah. So you might be right that based on the outcome of what we're hoping to gain, if it's a minimal risk or minimal loss, we might not do our best work on that. However, if it's important to us, we're probably going to be a little bit more obsessive on how we approach that. So some problems that we encounter with problem solving and decision making is confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is searching for evidence that fits beliefs while ignoring the evidence not fitting beliefs. So confirmation bias, for example, let's see here. I'm trying to think of the best example. Let's say that, and maybe some of you can relate to this. How many of you have had like a funny feeling that something bad was going to happen and it did?
I do.
Okay.
I can think of that.
What do you care to share?
Oh, just this week alone, me and my siblings, we were going to New York for our orthodontist appointment. And before we left, like I just had this really bad feeling in my gut. And then as we were driving on the highway, the car broke down on us.
Okay. Okay. All right. So you had like this feeling that something bad was going to happen, right?
Yes.
So what you just did was you kind of confirmed your instinct. You kind of confirmed your belief that something was going to happen, and the evidence was your car broke down. Right? We can see that with research too. We see people that engage in research, and for many of you that are doing the research next week, you've got your rough draft due. So pay attention to what your confirmation bias is, searching for evidence and that supports. That's pretty normal, right? We do that. We search, if we have an idea, we look for things that support. But the other side of that is, or versus, ignoring evidence that refutes. So that's what confirmation bias is. We're looking for evidence that supports what we believe. And if we have something that comes up that refutes it, we say, we're going to look the other way, or we may not even be interested in looking at that. All right. How many of you engage in that? You might have an argument that you have with either a coworker or one of your peers or one of your students, classmates, that you believe something. So we're only going to look in that direction. And pay attention to that when you're doing your research, because if you're only pulling research and talking about what is supporting your position, it's going to make it more well-rounded if you look at what's refuting it. Okay, because now you're arguing both sides, and you can it deepens or enriches the quality of your research that you're doing. So that's what confirmation bias is. I know I kind of went a little off tangent with that, but yeah, searching for evidence and refuting and ignoring evidence that refutes. Okay, so the other problem with problem solving is mental set, or persist in using past problem solving. Okay, so let me give you an example with that. So let's say that, again, you know how to tie a shoe. You apply tying the bow to a dock, and then you come back the next day and your boat is missing. Your boat floated off, probably because you tied it up incorrectly. The problem with mental set is that you're fixated in thinking, well, there's nothing wrong with how I did it. I tied it up, and then you do it again. So cognition and problem solving, and not being able to go back and say, well, maybe I tied it incorrectly. I'm going to try something a little bit more different, maybe a double knot, so on and so forth, changing it up to get a better result. For this one, I do have, so what I'd like you all to do really quickly is, let me see if I can share my other screen with you. Actually, let's do this. All right. So what I'd like you all to do on a piece of paper, if you're willing, draw this design. Let's see how many of you get it. All right, so your instructions for this task is simple. All right, on your paper, see if you can draw 4 straight lines so that they pass through all 9 dots without lifting your pencil from the page and without touching any dot more than once. Okay, so 4 lines. Don't lift pencil. Or pen. And don't touch a dot more than once. Did anybody get it so far? Is anybody trying this?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a great one to try with your friends to see what their mental set is. Okay. Does anybody have it? I know I didn't give you a lot of time to work on it. All right. You want the answer? All right. But in the interest of saving time here, I'll go ahead and do this. So what we're going to do, and again, the 4 lines, don't lift the pen, not touching more than 1 dot at a time. So here's what we're going to do. Y'all with me so far?
Yes.
4 lines, right? So what mental set is telling us, and we really learn this through, even many of you that have gone through public school systems, we learn to conform, we learn to stay within the box. And what mental set problems keep us from doing is considering other alternatives. And in this case, we didn't even consider, many of you probably didn't even consider drawing out that far and coming back down that far to complete this task. Okay. So yeah, a great little party trick. You know, I always like little parlor tricks when you're at parties or whatever. Ask your parents and see if they can think outside the box. But that's what mental set keeps us from doing. It keeps us from thinking outside the box, which hinders creativity sometimes. Okay. All right. So the last one that I want to share with you is functional fixedness. Now, I had a great example. Maybe I'll bring it up on Wednesday. So functional fixedness is thinking about only most typical functions of the object. only most typical functions of an object, okay? So for example, I put a desk together yesterday. This is a true story. Only most typical functions of an object. Function of object. So I didn't have a hammer and I had to put these dowel rods into my desk. I didn't have I had a hammer, I didn't have it handy with me. So I had to consider either walking quite a distance to get a hammer and come back. There was only a couple of dowel rods, but instead I had a screwdriver with me and I took the back of the screwdriver and hammered the dowel rod into the board, which worked, right? So I was able to use a tool that is not designed for hammering things in, and I was able to use it to solve my problem. That's overcoming functional fixedness. Like I said, I did have a great example for you. I'll tell you what, I'm at least going to show you the example here. Just so, because I'm going to have the other class do this, okay? Let's see, new share. All right. So on your screen, y'all, can you all see that? You got a thumbtack, box of matches, and a candle. So how many of you have an idea, using only the items on top of the desk, how can you attach the candle to the wall above the desk so that when the candle burns, it does not drip wax onto the desk? Maybe some of you have done this before. Any ideas?
Not one bit.
Not one bit. Anyone want to give it a stab?
Do you just tack the middle of the candle, like just to the wall above the desk?
Okay. What about the wax stripping?
It won't drip onto the desk. It'll keep all of it like in the middle of the candle with the flame.
Okay. Well, anything you know about candles is at some point the wax overflows, right?
Right.
So, and I'll kind of just give you the answer here because we're running up on time. The result, and this is functional, this is an example of overcoming functional fixedness, is emptying the box, because right in that moment, we're looking at the box as containing the matches, right? But if we take the matches outside of the box and affixing it to the wall, then we would eliminate the candle, we would eliminate the wax dripping onto the desk. And we could take the tacks to tack it into the wall, okay? So anyway, that's just an example of overcoming functional fixedness, all right? I know we're running up on time here, so I do want to check, does anybody have any questions on thinking and problem solving before we end today? Anybody have anything they want to add? All right, so I'm going to pick up where I left off on Wednesday. And we'll talk a little bit more about intelligence and how that plays into interacting in overcoming obstacles and problem solving in real world situations. Okay. Any other questions before we depart today? Okay, I'm going to stop recording now. I'll have just a few minutes if anybody has any